Hello and welcome to the show Beyond the Journal, where we discuss social media, digital education, and current controversies in cancer and medicine. I'm Dr. Jack West, Associate Clinical Professor in Medical Oncology at the City of Hope Cancer Center in the Los Angeles area, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Dr. Charu Agarwal, who is Leslie M. Heisler Associate Professor of Lung Cancer Excellence at University of Pennsylvania's Abramson Cancer Center in Philadelphia. Hi, Charu.
Hi, Jack. Today we are pleased to welcome Dr. Sanjay Mukhopadyay, who's the Director of Pulmonary Pathology at Cleveland Clinic, as well as Dr. Jared Gardner, who's a dermatopathologist and Section Head of Soft Tissue and Bone Pathology at Geisinger Medical Laboratories in Danville. Welcome, Sanjay and Jared. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
One of the big changes in the broader field of medicine has been this transition to use of telemedicine. Has the pandemic or simply time since we last spoke, or have there been further advances in telepathology? How has the pandemic changed the practice of pathology for you?
Jared, do you want to take that?
I mean, for my practice setting, and I had the interesting experience of working in two different institutions during the pandemic. I had already accepted a new job, and so when the pandemic started, I still finished up my old job for a couple months, and then moved, which was an interesting experience during all of this. But so at both places, I feel like it hasn't really changed how I practice pathology. I still use a microscope. I don't do like remote sign out with digital slides or anything like that. I know some centers are equipped to do that kind of thing, but that's not part of the standard workflow at the places I've worked. I think the biggest change for me is like on the educational side in my job. Both jobs I've had, I do a lot of education, and we've really transitioned to a lot more, remote meetings, Zoom and Teams and Skype conferences, which was great because I have already been doing that kind of stuff. And so I was, kind of prepared to handle this. But I think that's been the biggest change, is just doing those things. Sometimes we'll do instead of having residents around the multi-headed scope, especially early in the pandemic, we would do virtual sign out to keep, some distance between us. And we would pull up a screen and show what I'm seeing on my microscope, and they could be in their office down the hall, or even sometimes rotators might be at home. So that's the biggest change for me, I think, is the interaction with the trainees has been more virtual, but the actual day in and day out of signing out biopsies have been the same, more or less.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that's exactly my experience too. The actual sign out hasn't changed. With the, little bit of an exception is that we're slightly now moving towards the ability to do frozen sections from home, which is kind of an interesting thing,
cool.
Because sometimes you get called late at night for a transplant evaluation. You have to look at the kidneys and the liver and say, is this histologically okay to transplant? And then, at 2:00 at night, that's not a pleasant trip to make to come in. So we now have the ability to do that from home. And I think people are going to use that more and more as it goes by. I don't think it has anything to do with the pandemic. But then what Jared said is exactly applicable to me here too. Like when we traditionally, we do sign outs with our residents, they sit across the microscope from us. So I talk to my resident right across the scope. I show them findings, we discuss things. And now, because of social distancing guidelines, we have the option to do it all virtually, which means then we do it through Microsoft Teams or Zoom or something like that. And it's, it's interesting. It's taken away some of the, just the earthy flavor of interacting with somebody face to face. But then it's added a few kind of cool things which you can only do from your, when somebody's interacting with you through a digital kind of medium like that. And so I've tried to take advantage of the things that offers while sort of, mentally bemoaning the fact that you have lost that kind of face-to-face connection.
Now, you're both very well known for digital education, and frankly, both of you have tried a lot of platforms over time to see what works, which I think is great. What are the components that you have both focused on and found to be really important to get to the best audience in terms of, do you like having video versus text and pictures? I mean, obviously you want some visual component, but you would imagine that that Instagram or Twitter, you can share images. It's not as good for video, and also like the length of the videos. So what do you find to be your sweet spot in terms of what you're looking for? Are you still playing at using all different formats? Maybe Jared, if I can start with you and then get Sanjay's view.
Well, I was going to make Sanjay go first because I was like, well, I want to hear what he has to say, because I've got obviously a lot of different things to say about this. But yeah, I've basically tried to expand and continue to try new platforms over time. I got started obviously with the Twitter and Facebook as like my primary thing that got me into social media, and I still heavily use those platforms. But over time, I've tried to expand, for one thing, because I give a lot of lectures and write a lot about social media as a big part of my career. I want to actually have some expertise and sometimes audio. Like, for example, why I joined Instagram is because a dermatologist, a colleague of mine, was in the audience at one of my talks a few years back and said, hey, what about Instagram? And I was like, people keep talking about it. I've not really tried it out. And I thought I'm going to have to join. So I actually know. And now I actually have more Instagram followers than any other of my accounts, which is kind of surprising. So I've tried, that experience has made me want to continue to try new platforms just for the sake of seeing what sticks, what works. And I feel like they all have different benefits and serve different needs. I do. I'm a huge fan of videos, obviously, as I think you guys know. I like YouTube a lot for that because YouTube has such a huge audience. So many people use YouTube regularly, and also because it comes up on Google search really easy. It's kind of seems to be prioritized, right? So, someone, might search for a, keyword, and your video might pop up and you'll get a lot of traffic and a lot of extra views. So you have a broader reach that way. And then I also, I like to use digital slides. And so I'm really happy with KikoXP.com and PathPresenter.net that they're both sites that allow me to share digital slides in the online space, which is, for pathology, that's just a fantastic thing that I'd wanted to do for a long time. And there wasn't really an easy way to do it in the past. And now that problem has been solved. And then, so I think the different types of media lend themselves to different sorts of things, right? So YouTube's great for videos because you can have as long a video as you want within reason. And then, but you can only share short clips on a lot of the other platforms. So a lot of times I'll build a video and then I'll share it on all my other platforms, either with just a little screenshot, or sometimes I'll say, here's a digital slide. What's the diagnosis? And then the answer will be a link to a video that explains the slide. So I do a lot of cross-linking between all of my different platforms, which I think is beneficial because it allows different learners to kind of use the stuff that they like. If they want to just scroll through and look at pictures, that's cool. If they want to watch a full video, they can do it. And I also, with videos, I also make different types of videos. That's one thing over time. I used to make very long, in-depth videos, like here's everything you need to know about malignant peripheral nerve sheath tumor, hour and 15 minutes, like more cases than most people will see in their lifetime. And if you're in practice and you need to diagnose one, that's exactly what you want. But if you're a resident wanting to pass your boards, you do not want to sit and listen to one entity for an hour and 15 minutes. You want to give me the top 5 points about it in 5 minutes. So I've started making shorter, like 5-minute clips. And sometimes I'll even splice out little 5-minute segments from my bigger videos and share them because I feel like there are a lot of people that won't watch an hour video, and there are little parts in there that would be really beneficial, but they'll never see them because they're embedded in this video. So that's been another thing I've been experimenting with over time. I feel that allows me to kind of reach learners at all different levels. So I don't know, that's a kind of convoluted answer, but those are some of the things that I think about when I approach different platforms.
Big question. And Sanjay, your thoughts?
Yeah, what he said.
That's why I knew that he'd be like, well, Jared covered it.
No, this is literally, I just do what he does. I see what he's doing, and I follow his lead. It's really that simple. But I would echo some of that. I like the stuff where you can interact with people the most. Although, YouTube is great in that you can just put something there and then people will just watch over and over the years. And I tried something really cool recently, which is while giving a med student lecture virtually to our med students. So we were interacting with them, and I was posting in the chat links to my YouTube videos while we were talking. And so they were going and checking out additional. It was so cool. This is, again, something Jared has done before. But it's just so cool to do that, to be able to give them a link to a freely accessible thing that they can watch anytime when they want to from home is really interesting. And I find another kind of a little twist on the YouTube theme is that if you can, again, this is borrowed from Jared, because I saw him do a thing like this with a hematopathologist once, where he was kind of like the dumb question asker, and the hematopathologist was the expert. I thought that was so brilliant. You're basically letting them, show their expertise. You're interacting. It's as if you're sitting in the room during a sign out. So what we did is, there's a friend of mine called Matt Cecchini, who's a pulmonary pathologist in Canada. And I said, why don't we do this between ourselves? Let's just do a Zoom recording, right? And talk about a case like we would in if you came to my office and you were showing me a case. So we started talking about cases. Then there's other pathologists. There's Irene Sansano from Barcelona, Raghav Pilapa. We just get people into one Zoom meeting, talk about a case, and then just post it on YouTube subsequently. And that becomes for the rest of the audience, it just becomes a little, it's almost like a little window into the mind of a pulmonary pathologist and how people discuss things with each other, how they differ on things, it's really, you can tweak that YouTube format to make it a little more interactive. And I think that helps.
I love that.
Fascinating.
I'm going to steal that idea back from you now that you've modified it. That sounds so fantastic. I learned so much from meetings when there's panels talking about how do we approach this or that thing, and seeing the different ways people use different language, different diagnostic approaches. I learned so much from that. Plus, it's really fun. So that sounds really amazing, and I'm going to totally have to do that. The Sanjay method.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. When you started interacting, or when you first, sort of made an account on Twitter for the both of you, was digital education in mind, or is this something that you saw following and you thought, oh, this is great, maybe I need to run with it? Tell us how, you both are really, sort of wizards in a way, in terms of getting the message across. And also talk to us about how your audience has evolved over time. Was this specifically for medical students and residents, and now it's for peer education? But take us back to the beginning.
Jared?
Who do you want to go first for this? I don't know.
Okay, I can go first. So, when I joined, Jared was already on there. And, actually one of the things that got me interested was he did this just fantastic thing at our national meeting called the USCAP meeting, USCAP. And, what happened was, people walk past the big staircase where everybody's going up to the different rooms. And here was this dude, he was just in this open air thing. And he was just talking. And it seemed like everybody had stopped just to look to watch that. There was a huge crowd by the staircase watching this guy talking about stuff. And I had no idea, but they're like, oh, that's Jared Gardner. I'm like, okay. I had no idea, because I had no idea what Twitter was or what Facebook was. But at that time, he made this thing explode in the pathology world. And then somebody came to me right after my textbook came out and said, why don't you put it out there, on Twitter, that you have a textbook out. I'm like, what is Twitter? So that's how it started. But my only goal was to, promote my book. That's what I was trying to do. And once I put it out there and I started, looking at people's responses and what they were doing, I thought, okay, I'll put in a few, cases, put in an image or two. And then it just exploded from there. People are so warm and receptive in the pathology Twitter world. They make friends and stuff. So I never really went in with an audience in mind. It just organically grew from there. And it started with pathologists, but then, I was just amazed by how thoracic oncologists, thoracic surgeons would talk to you through this thing. I posted a thing once on large cell carcinoma versus large cell neuroendocrine carcinoma. I never thought it would be such a big, I just thought, well, it's something that our trainees struggle with. And then suddenly people reacted to that. They said, oh, I've never seen it being explained in this way. And so I found out that, there's a clinical audience for easily explained pathology too. Then I learned there's a medical student audience. Then, later when we did our vaping thing, I learned that there's a general public audience who wants to, interact with pathologists and know what you're doing. So it kind of organically grew, and I never really engineered it in any way. It just happened.
By the way, Sanjay, that was one of your greatest hits. The large cell carcinoma versus large cell neuroendocrine. I have to say, that's how I got to know you. I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Thank you.
And still called on. Yeah. So.
Jared, what about you?
And by the way, I'll point out that Sanjay is very soon going to surpass me and have more followers than I will on Twitter. His rate of growth is more rapid than mine. So, and he started way after I started. So he's kicking my butt, really, which is great because he's just such a masterful educator, you know? And I use him as an example when I give talks a lot of like the beauty of doing social media, especially Twitter, because it's public and you meet people you would not have met in real life. We're both pathologists, go to the same meetings, but really we run in different circles. He's in all the lung stuff. I'm on the derm path and sarcoma stuff, and we might never have really met or got to know each other. And then when he joined Twitter, I was like, this dude is like a man after my own heart. Like he's into education the same way I am, and I've met so many other people that way, and that's just been, I think, one of the most beautiful parts of social media to me is all these great relationships I've built. But when I started, let's see, I joined, I think my cousin invited me to join Facebook back when it was like just right after it first got public, I think 2006 or something like that. And then at meetings, I'd meet residents and other people, when I'd go to medical meetings, and I'd start friending them and keep in touch in between meetings. And pretty soon I had more doctor friends than non-doctor friends, I think, at some point. And so, when I got into practice, I decided I wanted to do something with education online, but I didn't really know about how to build a website or want to deal with hosting and coding. And so I thought, well, I'll make a Facebook group, and I made one for derm path and one for sarcoma pathology. And I thought I'd invite maybe 100 people I knew and share cases. And instead, thousands of people just started joining. The power of, the algorithm is that once one pathologist joined, every other pathologist on Facebook got a suggestion like, hey, you want to join this group? And they're like, sure. And so, I'm assuming that's how it happened. But so that was kind of around the time when, I guess it was 2013, when I was like, whoa, this is people are into this. And then Twitter, I joined Twitter supposedly, and Twitter tells me I joined in 2009, but I have to tell you, I do not have a memory of creating my Twitter account. I don't remember doing it. I must have just randomly signed up one day and let it just sit there. When I was in fellowship, I remember trying to tweet some diagnostic pearls I learned from Dr. Weiss. It was my sarcoma pathology mentor, and I didn't put any pictures with them. And there was no one really there. There was no audience yet. And so thankfully, I'm glad I didn't try more then, because I might've gotten discouraged and never tried again, because there wasn't a critical mass of an audience yet. But then after I got in, I think I was at a meeting. It was USCAP. In pathology, our life revolves around this meeting, basically. So USCAP 2014, I remember distinctly sitting in the audience listening to this really brilliant molecular sarcoma pathologist, Christina Antonescu, give a talk. And I was, 2 years in practice, and she was talking about how they discovered all these gene fusions that were not. And I was like, I'm never going to carve out a space for myself in my professional life. How can I ever do anything or novel when there are people like this who are more brilliant than I'll ever be figuring out? And then, along social media came. And so it was around that time I decided, I'm going to start working on Twitter more. And I remember also I had started originally tweeting about food with a local group of people that were food writers. My former partner, Sarah Shalin at University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, her husband is a food writer. It's The Mighty Rib, by the way. It's not about ribs. It's about all types of food. You should follow him on Facebook. It's fantastic. Really great stuff about food. But he's a food writer, so the local kind of food scene, they were using Twitter at the time, and I think they've switched to Facebook. But that was what kind of got me back into Twitter, was tweeting about food. And then I realized tweeting about a dinner I had and then a sarcoma, it just kind of felt incongruous. So I decided to make a separate account for the food stuff, and then my regular account I transitioned to medical only, and then it kind of grew from there. But my audience, I think, originally it was residents, doctors, pathologists mostly. And then that expanded over time. I picked up a different, medical students started getting interested when I posted content that was about normal histology or stuff that was relevant to what they were studying. And then I joined some patient support groups on Facebook, which has been truly life-changing. I gave a TED talk about that last year. If you just look up my name, actually, that'll probably be one of the top videos on YouTube. And that was just a really amazing experience to work with mostly sarcoma and other rare tumor patient support groups to volunteer to kind of help explain pathology and stuff to them. But I think I've learned more from them than I ever taught, that's for sure. But so then I now have quite a large audience of people who are not doctors at all, that are either family members or patients suffering from a disease, or other interested members of the public. So I found that, I've I've got this really wide group of people, sometimes, junior people that are, college students thinking about a career in science. And so I do modulate my content a little bit on different platforms. Like on Instagram, I tend to post things that are more kind of, pretty and interesting to a wider audience because I have a lot of non-medical followers there. Whereas on Twitter, I put a lot of stuff about like deep, nitty-gritty diagnostic detail. And then YouTube, I do a mixture of those because anyone can pick what content they want. So yeah, I feel like a lot of it though has been very organic. I mean, I did intentionally start doing active, education with social media, and that's why I really poured a lot of effort into it. But the audience growth, I think, has really been organic mostly. So that's a very long way to answer your question, but there you go.
I'm interested in the question of, do you feel like you're reaching different audiences on these different platforms, or do people go for the different content? In other words, do different people go from Facebook for what you post there versus Instagram or something? Or are you just deciding that there's a different demographic who's on Instagram versus Facebook, and you're just reaching largely non-overlapping audiences and need to post content in these different places and different formats to reach them?
I think a little of both. I think there's a lot of overlap in audiences, but I know there are some people who really don't like Facebook and they only use Insta or only use Twitter, and vice versa for all of the platforms. So, and it takes a lot of work to build new content all the time. So I like to use the same content across multiple platforms, and I tend to reuse it. If it was a good post today, it'll be good again in 4 months, So it's just that there are certain things, like particularly Instagram, I think I'm more cautious about. Like I try to not post tons and tons of stuff that's just, here's how to diagnose low-grade fibromyxoid sarcoma, just because I don't feel like there's as many people there that are interested. And then I do think sometimes I can drive, particularly with videos, I can share a video across my platforms, and then people will click the link and go watch the video a lot of times, or at least they'll make a mental note and go back and access the video when they need it. But I do think a lot of times otherwise it's hard to get people that are not used to using Instagram, they're not going to click to leave Facebook to go see an Instagram post if they could see the same thing on Facebook. So I feel like in the past, you can cross-share across platforms. I think that's gotten better now that Instagram is owned by Facebook. But in the past, I tried cross-sharing, and I found that people just really didn't interact with that content because they saw they were going to have to click and go to Instagram, and they didn't want to. And the same is true, I think, for Twitter and Facebook. I do feel like there's some people are hesitant to go to a different platform if they don't want to use that platform. Yeah. Whereas YouTube is so ubiquitous, I feel like most people will do that because everyone uses YouTube. So so I do think there are different audiences that get reached, and stuff that I think, surely everyone knows about this video I've had out for a long time. I'll share it in a different area, and people like, whoa, I didn't even know that you had a YouTube channel. So yeah, I feel like I'm constantly reaching new groups that didn't know before. So, and I mean, that's good with education. That's what you want, right?
Absolutely. Sanjay?
Yeah, definitely. I all of that, I echo that. YouTube is definitely the most, as an umbrella thing is the best. Everybody goes to YouTube. It's very easy to go there. But I find Jared is absolutely right about that thing about Twitter and Facebook. I find that for some reason, there's a huge Indian, people from India, a huge presence on Facebook. I don't know why. There's a huge presence on Facebook. And when you give them a link and say, here's a great tutorial on Twitter, very few people cross over to that. I don't know why that is. I just don't understand how that works. But for some reason, there is this little bit of a hesitation to switch from one platform to another.
And you're right. It is geographic because I've given talks in other countries. And I think when I was in Brazil a couple years ago, and also I gave a virtual talk in India, and in both places I talked about Twitter, and the audience members mentioned it's not really big in Brazil or in India. It's not as accepted or as used. People use WhatsApp or WeChat or whatever, or Facebook, obviously. And I mean, part of it's Facebook's been around longer, but certainly there does seem to be some degree of culture, geographic and cultural things of what's trendy to do in different areas, which again highlights the need, I think, for me as an educator, I want to use a lot of platforms. I think most users don't have to use every platform, just use the one you like. But as an educator, I want to get the content out to as many people as possible in the hopes that, one extra patient out there will benefit from it somehow. So it's kind of interesting.
So you're creating a lot of content on an almost daily basis, multiple times a day. You're creating videos. it almost sounds like you both could have a production team. Like, how do you manage it? And do you have funding to support this? Or is this something that you self-started and now have education companies supporting it? Or this is pretty much nights and weekends for you?
No, Sanjay,
okay, I'll tell you my funny story about the. Actually, this is as with all other things, this involves Jared. So Jared was actually instrumental in getting me to post when COVID was just starting. This might have been February, March. He texted maybe on Twitter or texted me, and he said, "Sanjay, you should do a YouTube video on ARDS." And, I never say no to anything he does because he's usually thinking like 2-3 years ahead of me, so I said, okay, I'll do it. I didn't really understand why that would be such a great thing to do at that point, but he said it, so I did it. So what happened now to address your point about funding and okay. So that night my kids went to bed and I brought out my, $200 laptop, my $200 laptop, plugged in old headphones, laid down on the floor on my where my children play, that's an old office, and just started recording off of an old PowerPoint that I had. Of course, this is my thing, lung pathology. So I just started recording, and I just made an impromptu video of the maybe it took half an hour to put together, and that thing has now more than 100,000 views on YouTube. That thing it's immense. It's my most viewed video ever off of something that Jared asked me to do. And then that got viewed by somebody from the New York Times, and they contacted me for another video that they were doing to put it together with them. And that's been seen more than 1.4 million times.
Wow.
And budget, zero. There's no budget. There's no budget. There's no funding.
Sanjay has gone way beyond me. Like he is now the master.
There's just Jared putting ideas in my head and me doing it on my,
Well, the idea for that was because I made a video about COVID right around mid-March, right when people knew it was going to be a problem, but the general public had no idea really. And there was just kind of trickle. And it was around the time that I finally sat down and it had been a long distant thing. And I finally sat down and did some reading about it. And I was like, oh my God, we are going to be in big trouble here actually. And so I made a video about this is important and serious and we really have to do something right away. And also because people were starting to ask me about it. And so it got somehow picked up by the algorithm and it got 200,000 views. It got 100 and some thousand views in a couple days, way beyond any of my other videos. So it's definitely those two COVID videos I made were like the top videos I've ever made. I've made them hidden now because the information doesn't matter anymore. And also some of it's not accurate anymore because we've obviously changed what we know a lot since a year ago. But yeah, around that time, that's why I thought, this would be a perfect thing. And who better to do it than a lung pathologist to talk about ARDS. But yeah, it doesn't cost very much really to do. I mean, it does take time. Time is the most valuable asset, right, for us. And I mean, I still use my MacBook that I've had for like 7 years. And I use Screencast-O-Matic is the software I've been using most recently to do screen recording. It's like $20 a year. I'm really happy with that. I use iMovie for editing my videos. I use digital slides.
Jared, don't you have that fancy thing on your scope that you mount on the fancy thing that you do to show your scope slides?
What do you mean?
The camera that
yeah. Well, I used to have one of those in my old job, but the new job has just like a regular, like a really nice Nikon camera, and it's mounted. And so I just put that on the screen if I'm using glass slides, and then do screen recording. And I mean, you can use Zoom, Skype. There's a lot of different softwares, but I've been really happy with Zoomcast-O-Matic. I found that kind of last summer, and it records like up to 4K, and it's like $19 a year, and I was like done. Super happy with it. So yeah, the expense is very low, and the equipment is not really have to be very fancy. It just takes your expertise and your time. And so time, is the biggest thing. I feel like you do have to just fit it in nights and weekends, and when you have some downtime here and there, and so that does take up things, but it's pretty fun, and I think it's helping a lot of people, so I feel it's worth doing. And you can make some money off it. I mean, I finally did last year monetize my YouTube channel, so I get some ad revenue from it. It's never going to change my daily life or my budget. It just but it feels like cool. I made a few bucks here or there, and so go towards paying off those student loans one day. But it gives you that gamification sense, that little dopamine hit. And so I figured I actually, as silly as that sounds, I found that it actually drives me to make more videos, even though I know that it's not going to ever materially impact my life. I'm not, my kids watch YouTubers that actually like, that's their only job and they make a full salary and probably a way better salary than I'll ever make off of YouTube. I'm never going to be that guy. Okay. Like there's no way that a content I make is going to be interesting to that many people. Like, a Mark Rober video will or something. And, but in any case, I feel that pushed me to make more content, and I feel like that benefits people. So I do feel like probably if I pursued it more, I could make it more commercialized and probably get some, paid sponsorships and stuff here and there. And maybe in the future I will, but I don't really need to do that. So I think though that mainly just finding the time. Your point about a production team, I thought about that many times of what of this could I delegate or pay someone to do. And I guess I'm a little compulsive. And so there's a lot of it that I'm just like, no one would know how to do it the way I want it to be or something like that. But I have gotten some volunteer help, like with transcribing videos. A lot of people have asked me for closed captions because I speak very quickly. And I just, as try as I might my whole life, I just can't change that. And people who are non-native English speakers do struggle to understand me sometimes. So I've asked people to like transcribe and type up the words, which is total scut work. But when they do it, I'll put it in there and feed it into YouTube, which will then, because YouTube's not very good at making medical subtitles. It really struggles in that area, I think, still. So I've done that before, and then told the person, I put their name on there. This is done courtesy of med students. So, and so that way they can put it on their CV as like, some volunteer work, and truly helpful. I have some of my followers on YouTube are actually hearing impaired, and they're like, I never could really get much out of your videos because I couldn't hear, but now that there's subtitles, I can. And I have to admit, I just never even thought about that actually. So, I feel like the volunteer work is an area that I've gotten some help, but I've thought a lot about how could I organize this and coordinate it more and get more accomplished, but I still have not solved that problem yet. Maybe next year.
So, you both have written textbooks, which is a media platform that's a few centuries older than anything else we're talking about. And I guess my question is, do textbooks, certainly in medical oncology and a lot of areas of medicine, the fields are changing so quickly that if it's in a book, it's probably obsolete. And half the time, the online publication is so far ahead of the actual print copy that comes 4 or 6 months later that it's old news by the time the print comes onto your desk. Is there still a role for a textbook? Are you going to do this again? And if so, what does it offer that you can't get from digital media?
Can I take that, Jared? Because this is very near and dear to me. So, you're right, Jack. This right on the money. First of all, among the generation of our residents, I feel like nobody reads a textbook. Maybe a few people read a textbook, but they're so used to the idea that they just go online and read some kind of an online source, with varying degrees of accuracy. But I feel that this is a losing battle, that eventually it's going to, decline. It's going to decline. The use of textbooks will go down and down and down. But I feel there's a couple of things where textbooks actually matter. And one thing is that there are, oncology is a very different field than pathology. Is that your field changes so quickly. You get a trial and then the standard of care changes and it happens in 6 months. In pathology, there's some things that are just universally true, and they just, like for example, I wrote a non-neoplastic lung textbook. Nothing's going to change about that in the next 10 years. Nothing's going to change. Fibrosis is fibrosis. Inflammation is inflammation. The granuloma is still a granuloma. So, in these slow-moving fields, I think there is some scope for writing something that, stands the test of time, and somebody can, just have a thing there all the time that they can easily look up or just keep by their microscope. So there's that advantage. I will say that not many people do that. It's a kind of an old-fashioned thing to have a textbook next to your microscope. But for the person who's writing it, actually, I think it adds some gravitas to your profile. You can say that I tweet, and you can say that I wrote a textbook, and there can be identical material in both things. And people will think that the textbook is more respectable than the tweet for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think you're right about all of that there's more and more of an interest in online. But yeah, there is definitely some foundational stuff in pathology that's not going to change or not change much. Then there are some things that might get nomenclature changes. And then there's, of course, the fringe areas where we're discovering new genes and new diagnostic modalities. But, like when I wrote my book, it's a survival guide, like intro level book to derm path. So it's basically the stuff that's very well understood and hammered out. We may change a little of what we understand about it genetically, but it's not going to change your daily practice. And also in my book, I put a lot of stuff about practically how I deal with when I have this and the margin's positive on the shave biopsy. And I don't know whether to call it actinic keratosis or squamous cell carcinoma. What do I say in my report? There is, I think, a great demand and interest in those kinds of things, those practical tips for how to deal with daily life. And you can certainly put those online too. But I mean, I thought that's when I wrote the book, that I thought this is going to be something that I actually think will benefit like junior trainees or people that are general pathologists in practice who don't see skin very much. And I've been really pleased. I've received a lot of good feedback that people did find it helpful. And so what I do think, in addition to the career building aspect, it also is really good for me. It took a ton more work than I thought it would. And I definitely have since turned down multiple other offers like, oh, hey, come write a book for us. I was like, nope, I think that one was good. I'm done. One and done. And hopefully I won't even have to update it for many years. And if I do, it'll be real minor. But the other benefit though is now there were a lot of things that I have like in my slide collection, but I'd never taken pictures of or organized and I would, want to go and share it or put it in a PowerPoint. And I was like, I can't believe I don't have a picture of a good AK somewhere because I see them every day, but it's so common that I didn't stop to take. So now I have a good picture of everything basically. And it's great for when I give talks now. I just pull up some pictures that I used in my book, slap them into a PowerPoint and give a lecture and people love it. And it saves me a ton of time. So it took me a lot of time on the front end, but now I have the benefit that I've got this really nice, organized, structured material that I can draw from again and again for teaching for social media. I use it in my YouTube videos sometimes. So there were some benefits from that angle as well. But I do think the online content is important. And I think one difference though, is for one point towards a book, whether it's a digital book or in person format, is it's all in one place, right? Twitter is very disjointed. And that's one thing I've always worried about with all the social, I've got all these posts out there, but they're all buried in the ether, right? Or the internet somewhere. And you can find them maybe by Google searching. Sometimes I'll do that. Instead of searching my own files, I'll go search on Google, JM Gardner MD Twitter, epithelial angioendothelioma, and it'll pull up the picture faster than I can find it in my own files, which is kind of crazy, but also awesome. And but I think that, having it all in one place and having it in text format is actually in some ways efficient for a learner because they, going and sifting through a long video might be helpful if you want to just like take in new information. But when you're specifically looking for an answer to one question, that's when like the book format comes in handy. And I think it will be digital more and more over time. But that I think is the one thing that I think there's still a need for text-based information, I think, out there.
Cool.
Speaking of pictures, pathology lends itself very beautifully to digital education. You can show a picture and really create a story around it. But the same is true for other specialties. Radiology is very visual also, but we haven't really seen radiology digital education taking off. Do you have a sense of why that is the case? It may be just that you two are really good at what you do, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. We haven't really seen any other digital field take off.
I have a thought about that. Yeah, I haven't really thought about it carefully, but as I'm thinking about that, and I think you're right. I mean, there are people on Twitter who post some radiology, right? There are people in thoracic radiology, for example. I feel one thing could be, and I'm just thinking my thoughts through right now, it could be that when you post a pathology image, it's very easy to make the case that this is in no way linked to a particular patient, right? You could say, here's an H&E of an asteroid body or a cell with phagocytosis, and you go, that could be any patient, any case. And most cases, we don't even know what that is. We just have a picture in our file and we have no idea where that case is from. So it's much easier to make the case that you're doing this in a completely de-identified, anonymized way, and there's zero risk. When you're doing it with pathology images, I feel that maybe radiologists might feel that this is a little bit that their images are a little bit more identifiable or in some way linked to the patient. I don't think that's the case, but maybe that's there, in their community that thought is there. Actually, one thing that changed this thought process in our community is a paper that Jared wrote. Jared and Eve Crane, who is now at Cleveland Clinic, is my colleague. They wrote a very seminal paper where they talked about ethical considerations in, posting pathology images. And that got people to say, hey, here is a concrete publication that, walks you through all these issues as to whether you can post an image and who owns the copyright and this and that. So I think that somebody needs to do that in radiology and convince them that it's not impossible to do this.
Yeah, I think the principles totally are the same, like that radiology images, as long as they're de-identified, like pathology is totally safe and ethical and legal and HIPAA compliant and all that. But I do think you're right that there may be some perception difference occasionally here and there. I also do think you're not necessarily that just that Sanjay and I are good teachers. I mean, I think we are, and we're prolific, but I feel like there is a community of pathology that is very strong. I mean, and we're a relatively small field, compared to some other fields out there, but I do feel like we have a very active and very tightly knit community, which I'm really happy about. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And I like to feel that I've contributed to that to some extent. And I feel like that's one of the things that'll be a legacy that I'll be really proud of and happy of. It's to bring all these people together or help encourage that growth. But I do think that there is something about having a critical mass of people that are interested in doing it and all enjoying and benefiting from it. Because when you put content out there and there's not really, many people interested in it, it doesn't really encourage you to make more content. So I think that is something, is having enough of an audience that you get the feedback that makes it interesting enough and worth your time to do, and that you feel like you're actually making a difference. So I don't know. I follow a lot of radiologists on Twitter, but I don't know. I'm not as closely linked to their world as to pathology, obviously. So I don't have a good sense for what the general feeling is among radiologists. But I do wonder maybe if there's some element of that each group and community of learners and teachers is a little different and has its own culture. And so that there may be something to that. And I do think that, I keep a list of pathologists and pathology accounts on Twitter, a manual list. I've been doing it for years, and I'm just like, it's a habit now. So every time I find a new pathologist, send them my social media guide, add them to the pathologist list. And it's up to like 7,500 right now. Wow. And I know that it must be way more than that out there, because I continue to find new pathologists every day that I'm not following yet, and I can't keep up. Like Twitter will continue to recommend more, and I'm like, okay, I've got to go to work, So I just do it as I can. So I'm guessing there's probably 10,000 or more, rough estimate, of pathology-related accounts. So that's a huge group of people. There's like 17,000 pathologists in the U.S., I think. So if you think about that, that's a large number of people.
Yeah, I think the conclusion is that there's a real network effect, obviously, for anything in social media, but even within our specialties, even within oncology, there's some subspecialties that are far more active, and they beget other people because there's already a group of people worth following. And I think that these disparities, become more clear over time. But one other thing that I wanted to ask about is, with everyone now having Zoom meetings and having other virtual meetings essentially every day, they also lend themselves to screen recordings and a lot more online content being shared, just showing up in your email inbox every day. Are you seeing this as well? Obviously, you are both kind of kings of producing content, but is the tail getting a little fatter on that of other people just giving a whirl and doing a 5 or 20-minute video and contributing to the conversation more than it being a kind of all winner take all kind of field?
Jared?
I think we're moving the needle a little bit, but I still feel like we have a long way to go. I do feel like one of the silver linings of COVID is that everyone has been forced to get used to using digital tools that are needed for teaching and recording. Even if they don't know how to record a video yet or whatever, they're already used to doing this kind of meeting like we're doing here. And then the next step is just recording and putting it online, which is actually pretty simple to do. So I think that's good. And I'm hopeful that even after the pandemic's done, people will continue to utilize some of these formats. I think the thing that I've seen is that a lot of people that have the content and the education and are giving lectures this way and are maybe even willing to do it. They're just not either interested or just don't feel like they know how to go set up a YouTube channel and share it. So I feel like that's a place where energetic junior people can help out. Like I just gave a talk at like Boston Children's about social media like last week. And that's what one of the fellows was saying, she's like, I don't really feel like I'm at the point that I can make my own videos, but maybe what advice would you give to helping faculty, to do that? And I thought that was great. Diane Brackett is who said that, a really wonderful colleague on Twitter. And I thought that's exactly what we need is junior people approaching the senior faculty and saying, would you let me make a video of you teaching me about slides and I'll take care of all the rest. And man, what a benefit to the world to get some people in there to just to do that and say, I'll take care of the technical stuff. You just make the video. And that's exactly what happened with the video I made with my former colleague, Jeanette Ramos, the HemePath video Sanjay mentioned earlier. I just was watching that video this morning for the first time in 2 years because I'm chopping it up to make little small bite-sized chunks out of this mega 1 hour and 40-minute hematology peripheral blood smear review, So, but I just said, Jeanette, everyone wants me to teach them about other stuff. I don't know about anything except skin and bone and soft tissue. I cannot teach about blood or brain tumors or anything like that. So I said, will you make a video with me and I'll be the student and you'll be the teacher and I'll take care of all the technical stuff, the editing, everything. And she was like, yeah, sure. And so that was a great way to do that. So I've done that also with the bone pathology expert, Andrew Rosenberg, who I just said, hey, Andrew, you're going to be giving a talk here. Can you just sit at the scope and let me record you? And he's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so I feel like a lot of people are open to it. They just need someone to say, I'll take care of all the stuff. Don't worry about the stuff. I'll do all the technical stuff. And I'll make sure that we can edit it if anyone makes a mistake, which almost never is needed, very rarely. But it makes people feel better to know that that's being done. And yeah, I'm pitching the case to my colleagues here in my department. We already record all of our lectures and grand rounds for internal use, but I'm like, why don't we modify them to the point that they can be used externally? So I'm still pushing. I do feel like there's some sense that people are not sure if they want their stuff to be online, or if maybe they're not confident that I don't know. I think there's a mixture of reasons people may be a little uncomfortable about it, but I'm trying to help convince people that we should be doing that. It's hard for me to give a lecture now if it's not going to be recorded and let me put it on YouTube later. I just feel like it's a waste of an hour for me. Yeah. In all honesty, I just feel like, that's going to be lost into the space, right? And instead I could capture it, put it online, and let my future trainees learn from it and people on the other side of the world learn from it. Plus, then I don't have to give that lecture again. If I don't want to, I can just say, here's a link, man, go check it out. And it saves me time. It makes me more efficient as an educator. So yeah, I'm hopeful that we'll see more of that, because I feel like, especially once you realize that, and I think that's the thing that I think maybe this is one of the reasons we don't see more of this, is people, at least in the United States, we don't realize how desperately educational material is needed in the rest of the world. Because here we're surrounded by books and more articles than we can read, and we can go to meetings, and even if we can't go because of the pandemic, we can go virtually, and we have more CME than we know what to do with. But when I travel to other countries, people say, please make more YouTube videos. We don't have anyone to teach us derm path in our country. There is no dermatopathologist pathologist in this country, or we don't have access to our attendings. We have to learn from our upper level residents. I was like, what do you mean? I was like, I sat next to the most famous pathologists in the world at the microscope and picked their brain all day long. And they're like, oh yeah, our attendings, and I know that's different in different places, but in some places, in some institutions, the culture is not to spend time learning from the experts. It's to just learn from your slightly more than you resident. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is a desperate need. And I feel like sometimes maybe we're a little so privileged in the United States because we're deluged with information, and we don't realize, because we haven't seen enough, how desperate the need is elsewhere in the world. And that's one thing that really drove me to do this more, is when I traveled and people told me that, and I was like, God, I got to make more videos, because this is actually the thing that's actionable, that's going to make a difference for people and their patients, in countries where they have a lot less access and a lot less privilege. So I feel like, to me, that was really a turning point when I decided, I do have the time to do this, because if these people have to take care of sick people without all the tools I have at my disposal, I can make some more time to make this happen. So I think that really, I didn't think about that till just now, but I think that was really a turning point when I decided this is what I'm going to do. And that's really when I started making videos, and I do a lot more video now, and I put less time into Twitter and Facebook, because I'm just constantly trying to crank out videos, because I feel like that's going to make the biggest positive impact for people. So that's my sermon on that.
Okay.
You guys are really trailblazers blazers in this field, and I think creating a legacy that will follow you, and for many learners that come through. So thank you so much for joining us today. You can find us on iTunes or wherever you find your podcast content. We hope that you will subscribe and send us comments and feedback to beyondthejournalshow@gmail.com. We would like to thank Mark Lindsay and Talking Speaker for production and distribution support. See you in a couple of weeks with our next guest. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Great talk.
Jack and Charu.
This is fun.
This was so much fun. Thank you, guys.